Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to the ongoing history of new music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. I've done hundreds of interviews with individual artists over the years. It's relatively easy. All you have to do is get this one person in a room, turn on the recording devices, and you're set. When it comes to interviewing a band, a little more tricky. You're lucky to get two members in the same place at the same time. But getting every member of a band in the same place at the same time for an interview is next to impossible. I've only managed to be so lucky a couple of times. U2, Kings of Leon, Foo Fighters, Green Day, Blink-182, and that's about it. And let me tell you something. Each of these interviews required extraordinary efforts under extraordinary circumstances. Such circumstances miraculously presented themselves with Billy Talent. All four guys around the same table in the same studio at the same time. The purpose? To get them to tell the story of Billy Talent in their own words. And this is part 2 of our conversation.
This is the ongoing history of new music, the podcast edition with Alan Cross.
Billy Talent with Rusted for the Rain, one of the singles from their 2009 album, Billy Talent 3. Hello again, I'm Alan Cross, and I'm back with all four guys from the band to recount their career in their own words. Part 1 was all deep background, and now we're ready to talk about the group's major label career, which began in the fall of 2003.
You got in just under the wire.
Yeah.
Because this is 99, 2000, 2001.
You're absolutely correct.
Just after Napster explodes.
Yeah.
And just as CD sales peak.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there was still money in the industry.
That's right.
Yeah.
And labels were willing to invest in bands, new bands.
Yeah.
And take a chance on guys like you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that and going back to it, like, so when Gavin Brown, who was an up-and-coming producer, and when Mike McCarty came, they saw us, and then Mike wanted to give us a publishing deal, which we didn't even know what publishing was. And then Gavin wanted to record these demos with us. So we ended up recording, how many songs? Like,
six songs. Yeah, for EMI Publishing, yeah.
So, and then once that kind of happened, then Warner Brothers was like, oh, so wait, you guys just signed? Okay, wait a sec. So now it was like once we kind of became bona fide, then other people started really coming to us. And Warner Canada, we decided to sign this deal with Warner Canada that they had the first right of refusal at the demos.
Yeah.
Right? Which was a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. In good faith because Jen,
because
Jen
of
had
Jen.
It was all because of Jen.
Yeah.
So then, cue to one night, we, and Hoffman, who passed away. What's
Steve Hoffman.
Steve Hoffman. Do you remember Steve Hoffman? Yeah, great guy. Rest in peace, Steve. But he, so now he was managing some bands, and so he came to the studio, the recording or our little jam space that we were at, and he ended up seeing us and hanging out, and he's like, "Do you guys mind if I call?" There's some A&R guys in from Atlantic, New York. Do you mind if I call them and see if they want to come down and check you guys out? We're like, okay. And he literally called them, and it was a cold night, 11 o'clock at night, and these two guys got in their cab and came to our rehearsal space and saw us play.
And they were here checking out some other band, the Sign, but
and that's when it got super weird.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. Well, because next thing you know, Atlantic, these two guys were blown away. And we're literally smoking cigarettes and drinking beer in our little,
we just
5
played
by
like
5.
3 songs in front of them, and then they were like, whoa, what's this? Like, let's go have a drink across the street at Betty's. And,
we did.
And it all got crazy from there.
So then they fly it back to New York, and they tell their president about us, and now Atlantic's really interested. But because we signed this Warner Canada first right of refusal thing, so now we have Warner Canada who's really interested. And then what happened is then it got super absurd because now Elektra and Warner Brothers in the States, now they're all interested. So we went from toiling in obscurity for 8-9 years to then all of a sudden, literally within 2 weeks, being flown back and forth to New York
for
every
dinner.
Weekend for a whole month. The whole month of August, we were literally getting flown to New York. The whole band taken out for fancy dinners,
staying at fancy hotels,
and they'd rent like the SIR, and we'd play like 5 songs in front of each of these labels every weekend. It was nuts.
And then it became
so weird,
like a good old fashioned bidding war on us. You know, and you also got to keep in mind, like, we are working class, you know.
Yeah, we're all 26 years old or something like that.
And we had no, like, this was, you couldn't even write this. And as far as we're concerned, like, first of all, being flown, so we're staying in like the Hudson Hotel and like going out to like nice restaurants. And, you know, it was an amazing time in the band. Yeah. We felt invincible at that point. Yeah. It's cool.
I bet.
Yeah.
As you're trying to figure out which fork to use when you sit down.
Exactly. What's a Kobe beef? Yeah.
There's a good story of Tom Wally had he wanted to see us. He was the president of Warner Brothers. I'm sure you know who Tom Wally is. And he didn't want to leave his beach house in New Jersey to come to the city, so they took us to New Jersey, rented an airplane hangar. We played the little session in front of him where he just sat down and looked at the floor and
he had Chris Isaac at his house that day. Remember that?
Yeah. He had this echoey like airport hangar on gear that that wasn't even our gear. So it was just a terrible situation anyway. But he still wanted to sign us, but he took us back to his beach house for dinner after, but he wouldn't let us into the beach house. We only got to eat on the patio.
He was having like a family birthday thing or something. So we were hanging out on a patio, and he's like, "The beer's on tap. Just help yourself." Like, that's awesome.
This place was amazing.
Yeah.
And then we had an awkward meeting with him, and then he's like, "All right." And then he left and went inside, and we were just like sitting on his patio, being like, "Okay, so what does this mean?"
Eating fried chicken and drinking his beer.
So what was the upshot of all this? What happened?
Well, what happened? And then we kind of got to that point where we had to make a decision because we were like, well, we're not quite sure. Maybe you can fly us out one more time. And then we just decided we also, there's a big part of our success is a guy named Chris Taylor, who's a lawyer in the city. Now he's doing a million other things, but so he started working with us, and he kind of became our advisor. And so we were looking at all the offers, and we decided at the time that we were going to do a split where we were signed. I can't remember the actual percentage, but it was like 70-30 Atlantic.
80-20.
80-20 Atlantic in the world and America, and Canada, Warner Canada would still have us in Canada. And so we decided to go with Atlantic Records, which was...
The original A&R guys that we had seen,
they came down.
They were from Atlantic, Tom Storms and Kevin
Williamson. That's a pretty legendary record label. I mean, that's Led Zeppelin.
And that was part of the selling power for us.
We even got to meet Ahmet Erdogan.
We sat in Ahmet Erdogan's office the day we signed, and
on his birthday.
I'm looking up at the wall, and there's the bow from like Song Remains the Same that Jimmy Page played on his wall. I mean, like, we were just like, this is insane. Like, it's Ahmet Erdogan, like all the artists on that label, and that
from
definitely
Ray Charles forward. I mean,
Ray Charles,
Redding,
Aretha Franklin,
and you know what he says? He's like, "It's my birthday, and you know what I want? Billy Talent.
Billy Talent for my birthday."
We're like, holy So and then we signed.
Billy Talent and Nothing to Lose from their self-titled major label debut album. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
Which leads us finally to the first album.
Yeah.
So that, I remember hearing it for the first time, and I remember thinking, that's an interesting singing style.
Yeah, I still say that. But
it was distinctive. In an era coming out of the 90s where everything was drop D tuning and everybody was, Eddie Yarls. It was, there was you and there was Rain Maida, who were distinctive Canadian voices.
And I appreciate that. Well, I mean, I guess the weird thing for me in singing is that I the first 5 years of being in a band, I was trying to sound like other people. I was trying to sound like Eddie Vedder. I was trying to sound like Scott Weiland. I'm trying to sound like Zach de la Rocha. I'm trying to do that. And then I realized I can't do that. So I just kind of ended up being me. And I think the reason that, the band stood out so much at that time is because, much like we were saying, but we were coming off, it was Moist and Treble Charger and Tea Party. And that was kind of what was happening in Canada at that time. I'm Mother Earth, And we were just so far from that when you when it was on the radio or when it, you heard it, it stood out that much more. It was strange.
I would make the comparison to some Johnny Lydon.
Yeah, well, and I'll say thank you. Yeah,
because again, very distinctive.
Yeah,
and when a Billy Talent song came on the radio from that first album, you knew immediately that it was this new band called Billy Talent, and no one else.
No, yeah. Well, I think that's been the blessing and the curse. Our band is. And also with Ian's guitar playing and just songwriting abilities too, is like it sounds like us, and I think that's something, especially now that we've been doing it for a couple of years, that it's still nice for that distinction to still occur,
So that's always my favorite compliment, is that people can't peg the band and they just say, well, you guys just sound like you and you don't sound like anybody else. And to me, that's the best compliment.
I agree.
Let's go back and talk about your guitar playing. Who are your heroes?
Not the ones you would think. It's funny because people ask me who are my favorite guitar players. I'm like Andy Summers, Mark Knopfler, a lot of guys that played clean. Jimmy Page, not that big. At that time, the big Mesa sound was like cha-cha, like that. Yeah. That drop D sound was a big popular thing. But I do play in drop D, but I wanted it to sound clean. And Tom Morello. Kim Thale from Soundgarden, and those would have been my influences.
Because again, just like listening to Ben sing, listening to you play guitar, you know that it's you. And again, with some of the parts, with the way Aaron plays, is a hard hitter, and John at the bottom end, it's the sum of the parts just worked. And it took it took your 10,000 hours to work.
His guitar playing is the most unique in the world, in my opinion. Nobody plays like that, and that is definitely a part of the sound is as important as the voice.
I think when the band was first starting, I was the rhythm guitar player. Never felt comfortable playing lead, so I ended up trying to do both when I became the sole guitar player in this band. And by doing that, I found like dropping to D, I could play bar chords with one finger and then do a bunch of leads with the other. And from doing that, I just kind of discovered this new approach to playing guitar, which it's almost like piano playing in a way,
He's also self-taught too, and I think that has a huge.
Yeah, you had no idea that you were screwing up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I never wanted to play traditionally. Anyways, I looked at the guitar as something fun, and the way someone like Tom Morello played it, it was really interesting, and he got all these cool sounds out of it. So I wanted to do the same.
A lot of what Tom Morello does is what he doesn't do. It's the spaces between the notes.
Totally.
That he's like a jazz player in that sense. Yeah. It's what he doesn't play that makes it so cool.
Absolutely.
Do you use any weird tunings?
Just drop D standard, and that's been that way for 23 years, like since the band started.
Let's move on through this first album. So you get the deal with Atlantic Records, and what do they do with you?
A whole bunch of nothing. So, in Canada, much to your point earlier on, we were really lucky and really fortunate because, it was at the time where radio was playing rock music, and there was multiple stations across the country that were playing us. We also had the fortunate, the door kind of closing where Much Music was still playing videos and were playing us, in high rotation. And then all of a sudden in Canada, it just kind of like we got shot out of a rocket. It was insane that people were actually lining up to come see our shows, and and that was obviously blew our minds.
Another thing I think that happened around the same time, and again, you were insanely lucky, is that the Canadian content requirement for radio went up to 35%.
There you go. Yeah, so, of course that helped. Yeah.
So suddenly there was room. There was more demand for Canadian material on the radio.
Yeah. So we benefited. I still think to this day that we benefited from that to be able to sustain a career now. And in the States, we released Try Honesty, and it did quite well. And then the label had a choice to release another single, and they didn't. And that was kind of the beginning of our up and down battle with America. Because, we've just never had a lot of luck with labels or management in that regard. But y'all all know my name. Don't think I'm insane. But y'all all know my name. Don't think I'm insane.
River Below, another single from that first album. When we come back, stories of record labels and promises and deals that did not work out. And a few that did. Hang tough. This is part 2 of a program called Billy Talent in Their Own Words, and it's just like it sounds. All 4 members of the band telling us their story. And like many groups from Canada, they ran into trouble breaking into America.
So at that beginning with when Atlantic, they did, obviously they gave us a little bit of leeway to do some of the things we wanted to do. We recorded the record out in Vancouver. They were fine with us using Gavin, the small local Toronto producer, instead of pushing somebody else on us. And I think they did give us some pretty good initial support. They got us, all of our record labels connections through Europe and things like that. But then, like Ben said, after Try Honesty, they just pulled the chute.
Why? Why did you lose?
It was
money.
I think it was heading to near Christmas, and they had bigger artists that they were needed to promote, and I think we're just one of those bands that they could have worked us at radio more, and they just didn't because they had other.
Well, they had other issues at the time, because I remember 2004-ish, Warner had a big cull of artists. They dumped a lot of people because they were so afraid of Napster.
Yeah.
They were so afraid of piracy. They were so afraid of declining CD sales that there was a time, and Warner was in trouble financially, I think, and Warner America anyway, and they got, I remember there was 1 week, I think they dumped 200 artists.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we were told that any artist that sold less than 50,000 in America would get dumped, and we were literally on our second record around I think 60,000 or something. So they kept us around, and we wanted to get dumped at this point because they weren't really working us. Right. So.
Well, you also got to keep in mind too is like there was not only was there the band side and the artist side being let go of, but all the people that we had met and all the people that were our quote unquote champions to like help us, they all got fired.
See, this is what a lot of people don't understand.
And then next thing you know, you're standing in a room with a bunch of people you don't know who have no vested interest in you, have not discovered you, don't potentially maybe not even like you, and you're trying to ask them for. And
maybe
help.
Support.
And maybe the people
tour support,
and maybe the people that were your champions, all of a sudden anything that's associated with them is tainted.
Yeah.
Because they got fired.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of that, and that happened to us like 4 times in the States, you know what I mean? And we just never had that extra, support or push that would take us to the next level,
See, at this point it has nothing to do with talent. And it has nothing to do with ability.
Business.
It's all business, and it's the weird relationships.
Cold hard facts. Yeah,
that go on in the record industry.
Yeah, that's hard to not let the cynicism seep in.
But the good news is in Canada you're doing well, and
Europe
and Germany.
Europe.
Yeah.
So why Germany?
That's the age-old question that none of us can really answer. But I think, just honestly, we put in the time there. We played every small club in Germany on the first album, and we got the right tours opening up for one of the best punk bands there called the Beatsteaks. And it just took off organically there first.
Yeah, and it was on the radio, it was on MTV.
Yeah, we also had support. Yeah, we had like our label were helping us.
When we weren't there, the people that were working at the label were busting their ass to get us out there.
And it was the same in the UK as well. Like that's where we really like. I remember playing Reading in Leeds for the first time, and like the Black Keys were on before us, and like all these bands that are now doing well, like and seeing this progression kind of happen with a lot of bands. And for us, we decided that we're going to spend more time in Europe because that's where things were happening. So instead of going to the States and playing in front of, half sold rooms and half small clubs, we decided to go vest all of our time and energy into playing festivals. And that there's a culture in Europe that didn't really exist here at the time, like the festival culture as well.
Well, I remember seeing you play Rock am Ring for the first time.
Yeah.
And thinking, how many, this guy used to get me coffee and he's singing in front of, how many people?
110,000.
Devil in a Midnight Mass, the first single from that second album, cleverly entitled Billy Talent 2. All right, let's get caught up on that record.
Second album. You didn't come up with a title for this one either.
Yeah. Well, we did. Just people didn't really like it.
2 sounded so good.
Yeah.
Billy Talent 2.
Well, if it was okay for bands like Chicago,
Yeah.
you know,
Or Led Zeppelin.
or Led Zeppelin, all right,
Such a
fine.
daunting process to name a record, though. And I remember Ian suggesting, I think it was you who suggested the 2, right?
Well, I just thought it would look really cool graphically for 2 bars next
Yeah,
to
that was
Billy
it.
Talent 2. Yeah.
And that record did all right again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did amazing.
Yeah.
I think that was
Yeah,
our
that
biggest
was
record.
that was
I think that's one of our fan favorites.
Yeah.
Billy Talent 2.
I remember before it was done, thinking, like, am I ever going to get back to Germany? Am I ever going to go to those places again? Was that a once in a lifetime thing? We had no idea. My wife and I had decided to extend ourselves and buy a house. I'm like, am I going to be able to afford this house? It's all crazy.
Okay, you found a banker willing to give you a mortgage.
Oh
in a
man, there
Canadian.
was so much red tape. My wife had a good job.
Oh, okay. Because in a Canadian rock band, on their difficult second record. Yeah.
But I think, too, is when we kind of realized, I mean, we again went to Vancouver. We recorded at the Warehouse with Brian Adams' studio, which was great. Gavin was producing, and it's also where Ian became more involved in the production as well, because he's always been the main songwriter in the band. But it's when Ian kind of first went, oh, I get this, and and kind of dipped his feet in the production waters. And so it was a really cool experience for all of us, because I think the songs were, I mean, we had songs like Surrender on the record and songs like Pins and Needles, which were kind of expanding, and Navy Song, like songs that kind of expanded us from what was just kind of going on at the time, you know? Because I think people were kind of thinking that we're this hard, kind of crazy, screamy band, but we also took time to nurture and look at other aspects of us. So it was almost like reverting back to the Pez stuff, because in Pez we were all over the place, and now we're kind of going like, okay, yeah, we're good at this, but let's try pushing things a little bit forward, you know?
I think it was important for us to get out of that screamy thing from the first album and become like a real band that's not just based around screaming, because that was a trend that happened in the early 2000s, screamo, and it's, you know, but I don't know, for me, melody is still super important in songs, and
absolutely,
and that was one of the things going in, knowing that like we have to do this.
Yeah.
And guess what our A&R rep, Mary Gormley, said to us when she heard the record for the first time? I don't hear a Green Day single, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's more or less sums up our relationship with America
And so,
record label.
It's funny because our biggest singles are from that album. Too.
Yeah,
Like some of the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Right, so.
And a crooked little town, they were lost and never found. Fallen leaves on the ground. And a crooked little town, they were lost and never found. Fallen leaves on the ground.
So how did you manage to write such a successful record when you were on the road almost constantly from the first?
It's the wanting to outdo yourself, and you know that your second album is that's your big shot, and it's like it's the one that, you know, if you write a crappy second album, it's your career's over. So I think it was that kind of drive that made me want to, you know, make these songs the best they can possibly be and expand the sound of the band, and it was that drive, that ambition.
Well, you're also given time because you know the first album comes out 2003. You release the second album 3 years later.
Yeah.
And then the third album comes 3 years after that. So it's not like you've been, you know, you were being forced into a Beatles schedule where every 6 months you had to have a new album.
Right.
No,
but we were always working.
on the road. Yeah.
Yeah, we would tour
A
for
year and a half to 2 years. Yeah.
of just straight touring.
But even on the road, like you have, you know, I had guitars around, and I was always have these little recorders and work on tunes. Even when we had a van, I was sitting in the back, like, you know, recording stuff on an acoustic guitar, and that's important. You got to keep doing that on the road.
What about lyrics?
Well, I mean, at that time, you know, Ian and I have always done it together, you know, so we would always wait till, and still to this day, when the music's done, that's when the lyrics kind of would start. You know what I mean? So, I mean, on the first record, a lot of the songs, we had years and years of working on them. And then there were some songs on the first record, like...
River Below.
I remember working with that at your apartment and just sitting there, and, you know, you had this, like, you had the chorus.
Yeah, the chorus was already
like,
there. We wrote the majority of
yeah.
that song in the office at the factory.
Yeah, there you go.
In the studio in Vancouver. I remember
it
sitting in
all-
that room with a little computer, and it was...
God, God, it feels like
Crazy.
like a million years ago. But yeah, you know, so it just kind of works part and parcel with him being so great at what he does. You know,
your first album you have like 10 years to write, and then the second one when you're under the gun, either you fail or you just go for it and do it. And I think that was our mentality back then. We were young, we wanted to prove ourselves, and we were like, let's make a kick-ass record.
There's Red Flag from Billy Talent 2, released on June 27th, 2006. We'll continue this talk with all four guys in just a second. This is part 2 of Billy Talent in their own words. Let's keep going. We now need to talk about the third album, or at least start talking about it.
So you have the third album, and I would imagine you went into that with a fair amount of confidence based on what you did with the second, except that you couldn't find a title.
I think, well,
the third album was an
interesting chapter.
Worms, yeah.
I don't know if we've ever had confidence though. That like we have confidence in our abilities and all that stuff, but there's, as a musician, I think there's always a underlining insecurity.
Yeah.
And all that kind of. I don't think you ever feel secure.
Yeah, I think you put your best foot forward and hope for the best, and know that you've done your best. But there's never a confidence like it's going to work, like people are going to actually like it. It's a really insecure thing being in a band and being a songwriter. It really is. Yeah.
Let's look at 2006. So again, the music industry is evolving very rapidly.
Yeah.
We're seeing sales really start to go down. Music industry is panicking because revenues are falling. People are still talking about piracy, and we haven't got to the era of streaming yet. Mm-hmm. We still haven't even, 2006, we don't even have an iPod yet.
No.
Or sorry, the iPhone yet.
Yeah.
So what was it like then?
Well, I guess for us, we were still trying to, you know, the second record, we had a lot of success, which we were very fortunate for and appreciative of. And then our manager at the time, we got asked, there was a fella, so we ended up signing with Warner now, US, and there was a guy named Craig Aronson who was a lovely guy who unfortunately has passed away since. He was an A&R rep, and he was like, who's your top 2 producers that you'd want to work with? And we're like, Butch Vig and Brendan O'Brien. And so we reached out to Butch, and he was interested because he was just finished recording with our friends Against Me. They did a great record called New Wave. And so they sang our praises to him, and he heard some of our songs, and he wanted to work with us, but he was working with this little band called Green Day at the time. So he couldn't do us, and then we sent it to Brendan, and Brendan heard it and loved it. And next thing you know, Brendan O'Brien wants to record our next record.
In Atlanta.
In Atlanta. Well, LA and Atlanta. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's when we had a big holy moment. We're like, you know, Brendan O'Brien's flying in Toronto, coming to our shitty little rehearsal space at the top of the road here, and is going to like work with us and wants to produce our record. That was scary. Yeah. Yeah. He was a nice guy, so he flies up, nice dude, hears some songs. And then, I can't remember how quick of a turnaround it was till the time we were there.
Pretty quick in the studio with him.
Yeah.
40 days in Atlanta, including mixing.
Yeah.
And then, well, we did a bunch in Toronto as well. But that was like that was an interesting thing because the label at this point now wanted an A-level producer, and I was confident of doing this myself at this point. But when they're throwing around names like Butch Vig and Brent O'Brien, I was like, well, we got to work with one of these guys. So
yeah, because Ian was going to produce it up until that moment.
Yeah,
because the second one had done really well, and so we all we're like, oh my God, it's Brendan O'Brien. He's done all our favorite Rage Against the Machine records and
Pearl Jam
records, and so we went down and worked with him, and it was a really different thing for us. Those songs at the time on the record, some of them were really suited towards his style, like Rusted from the Rain and Devil on My Shoulder, but some of them weren't, and it ended up being a really weird record. I don't know if our fans appreciated it to the extent that we thought they would, but some of the songs did really well for us. I mean, it was a first charting #1 was Rusted from the Rain that we've ever had. So, looking back, it was a weird time.
It's been a polarizing record for our fans too. Like it's a grower in a way, I guess, when when I hear people talk about it, they're like, I didn't like it at first, but now it's one of my favorites. And I think a lot of people have had that experience with that record. Yeah.
Maybe that's the mark of a true great record, where people can go back and listen to it many years later and hear new things.
No, I think it's a great record.
Oh, totally, yeah. You know, it was just it was a weird time, and the industry was changing, and we were changing as people and as the band, and you know, and not to reference Pearl Jam, but you know, a band like Pearl Jam, they've had that, you know, I always look to them as a source of inspiration because they've had tremendous success, and then they've had some records where they just kind of fell off a bit, and then 8 years later they're back with this big splash and great songs and sold out tours, and you know, and so I think that record means a lot to us, Billy Talent 3, but it was also like a point where like, okay, we learned some stuff from that point.
There was also some dark times with that record for the band too, disappointing times, because we had finished this record and we really thought it was great. It sounded different than our other records, but we were confident in the way it was going to be delivered. Like it was kind of our rock record, where the first two were more of a punk record. And then
it got rejected, yeah.
3 months before it was going to come out, it got leaked. And then 2 months before it was supposed to come out, Warner US decided that they didn't want to release it. And it was scheduled all around the world to be released. Yeah. Except now we didn't have a label in the States to release a record.
We had already left Atlantic Records to go with Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And
so Tom Whalley just pulled the plug on us.
He pulled the plug. So we ended up going to now Roadrunner Records, because Ron Berman was a fan for a long time, and they put out the record, and it was like a last minute thing, so they didn't have a lot of time to set it up or anything.
It was also months after the release date too.
It was, yeah.
Which that screwed everything up for us, because back then, like you said, it was still it was pre-iPhone, no streaming sites. So when it got leaked, it was done. It was just out there, and all the record labels were just super disappointed, and they all just kind of pulled back on the whole release and kind of sabotaged the record in a way. So there was a whole bunch of things that went against it.
Yeah. But I think it did well in Canada still.
Yeah, it still did good in Canada and in Germany.
Wasn't this the tour where you guys sold out Maple Leaf Gardens or the ACC?
Yeah.
The first one was in 2006 on Billy Talent 2.
It was on Billy Talent 2. That was February 2006.
I think we sold out the tour on this tour, on 3 though. We sold out ACC on that.
Was it as well? But I know the first time we played ACC was 2002, because remember we had all the album artwork being projected. The album 2.
Oh, okay.
Remember all the album artwork was being projected.
The show that I saw was with Rise Against. I remember standing out at the back of the ACC and watching you guys play and going, yeah, the boy's done good.
I got the devil on my shoulder. I got the devil on my shoulder. I got the devil on my shoulder.
So, how did all this work out? Well, we'll have to wait for part 3 to find out. And we will finish it off next time with discussions about the 3rd, 4th, and 5th albums. And we'll talk about Aaron's battle with MS, something that has been a group effort from day one. Meanwhile, let's you and me talk about whatever is on your mind. I'm always available via email. Just hit me up at alan@alancross.ca, and I promise to write back. Plus, there's my website, which is ajournalofmusicalthings.com. It's updated 365 days a year and comes with a very nifty daily newsletter that summarizes everything you need to know about what's going on in music that day, and then some. If Facebook is your thing, I've got a couple of pages, and you could also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Google+. Like I said, we should talk. Join me for part 3 of Billy Talent in Their Own Words, next time with the ongoing history of new music. Technical productions by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.
You've been listening to the Ongoing History of New Music podcast with Alan Cross. Subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and everywhere you find your favorite podcasts.